So now let's discuss the most complicated job of among the vice president. So based on the given job description of the previous vice president, how critical and dynamic working in a finance field could be. So to have a glimpse of how hard and dynamic the work of a vice president for finance is, let's have the statements of the different vice president for finance of the different companies. First of all, we have Jin McHugh from Unilever. So he says that finance plays a critical role across every aspects of our business. So we enable the business to turn our ambition and strategy into sustainable, consistent, and superior performance. Another one is from Jollibee Corporation by Ismael V. Baisa. He says that it's very exciting because you are not just thinking of today, but what the company will need in the future. Next is from Globe Telecom, Albert de Larzabal, where he stated that yesterday's solutions are never adequate for the future. And for the Vice President of Finance of SM Corporation, he stated that now we don't go out because we need funds. We go out because it's an opportunity, by Jose T. Shaw. So, based from their statement, the role of the Vice President for Finance of the financial manager is to determine the appropriate the company's capital structure. So when we say a capital structure, it is a structure on how you see your assets is financed. So it could be financed by debt or financed by equity. So it's a mix of the balance of a liability and equity. So what you can see is an example of a sample capital structure where we have here the total assets of the company, and so from this point, so we can say that it is almost 60% of the company's asset is financed by liability and 40% is financed by equity. So it involves the accounting equation where asset is equal to liabilities plus owner's equity. So it is the idea where they get the capital structure. So, because in order to acquire assets, your funds must have came from somewhere, that it could be both using cash from your pockets or it could be or it is financed by equity. While on the other hand, if you do not use your own money from your borrowings, then this asset is bought by debt. So, from the figure, as you can see, it is finance, 60% of debt and 40% of equity. But do you think that there is an ideal mix of debt and equity across a corporation? So, some of you might say yes and some of you might say no. But actually, there is no actual mix of debt and equity financing. They vary in different corporations depending on how the finance manager will work out the strategies to maintain the company's capital structure. So, it is the very first responsibility of a finance manager. So this advantage of debt and equity financing will be discussed more on Lesson 5, the sources and uses of funds. Another job of a finance manager is to look for investments that could be either short-term or long-term. So when we say short-term investments, decisions are needed when the company is in an excess cash position. So in terms of excess cash, so the vice president for finance should invest the excess money in a short-term investment wherein that investment will earn a profit for the business in a short period of time. But this concept will be more discussed in Lesson 3, the financial planning tools and concepts. So, upon making a decision of short-term investment, the company should choose which type of investment it would invest in that would provide a most optimal risk and return trade-off. So, remember that every time you wanted to invest, not just for the company or even you want to invest for your own, there is always a risk and return trade-off. So, if you are an individual investing, then you will be the one to show, who will shoulder the risk and the return would go to the company. But if you are a vice president for finance, then you should be very careful to look for a lower risk but could have a higher profit in return of the trade-off. So this will be more discussed in Lesson 6, the introduction to investments. So another type of investment is a long-term investment where they would select, so in terms of excess cash, he would select stocks or shares that will earn in a longer period of time. So, as stated earlier, you're always planning for the future. So, when you look forward to an investment, you look for a long-term investment where you can use the money or the profit after several years or decades. So as Vice President of Finance, you are using a capital budgeting analysis. So you can check if a company is or a business is profitable in the long run and it will be further discussed in Lesson 5. So the basic long-term financial concepts. On the other hand, if you are a lending company or you are loaning or making a debt to a lending company, you should give the confidence to the bank or the institution, or on the other hand, you are the one to check if the company na papautangin mo will be able to pay you back. So, the next is the operating decision that deals with the daily operations of the company. So, another role of the Vice President for Finance is to determine how to finance working capital accounts such as accounts receivable and inventories. So the company has a choice on whether to finance working capital needs by long-term or the short-term sources. So, another role is that yung yung pinaglalaruan ng Vice President for Finance, yung sa suppliers at saka yung sa inventory. Tsaka yung accounts receivable. Kasi 'di ba, as discussed, pwede siyang maging financial instrument, yung accounts receivable and inventories. So, another job for Vice President of Finance is to maximize na pwedeng gawin niya. Mangutang muna siya ng mangutang ng resources, tapos tsaka niya yun babayaran. Para na ibis na ibayad niya agad, yung perang ibabayad niya, i-invest niya pa sa ibang bagay na baka sakaling kumita pa yon. So, isa din, ito yung trabaho niya sa operating decision is to look for short-term sources that will be payable in at most 12 months. Na, ganap siya ng lending company na mababa yung interest rate or pwedeng or ang common kasi kapag short-term loaning, mataas ang interest rate. So, as Vice President for Finance, so maghahanap ka ng kung ano yung pinaka-best na pwede mong pag-utangan in case of shortage of cash. So, as I'm saying earlier, another job is the supplier's credit. So, chine-check lagi ni Vice President for Finance si supplier's credit. So, kung hanggang saan or hanggang magkano ka papautangin ni supplier. Kasi nga, instead of paying, pwede mong isagad to the limit yung uutangin mo kay supplier. Tapos, bayaran mo siya unti-unti. Kasi instead, bayaran mo siya ng isang buo. Yung ipangbabayad mo ng isang buo, ipang-i-invest mo pa sa iba. So, pwede ka pang kumita ron. So, kailangan, pag nag-target tayo ng Vice President for Finance, medyo magaling tayo sa yung tinatawag nilang diskarte. So, the short-term sources pose a trade-off between profitability and liquidity risk. Because this source matures in a short period, there is a possibility that the company may not be able to obtain enough cash to pay their obligation. So, yun yung isang risk na laging hinaharap ni Vice President for Finance. So, the other source of fund is the long-term sources. So, kabaliktaran siya, it matures in longer periods and dahil it will be paid much later, the lender expect more risk and place a higher interest rate, which makes the cost of the long-term sources higher than short-term sources. However, since long-term sources have a longer time to mature, it gives the company more time to accumulate cash to pay off the obligation in the future. So, in terms of gathering funds, isa sa mga kinakonsider ng Vice President for Finance is the long-term sources. So, this is the period kung saan naghahanap naman si Vice President for Finance ng lending company kung saan pwedeng may lower interest rate at saka longer period. Kasi nga, ang purpose is that yung future payment nila or bago mag-mature o tubuan yung pera, marami pa silang pwedeng mapagkamitan. So, yung kung alin ang pipiliin ni Vice President for Finance, kung mag-short term ba siya at maglo-long term ba siya ng pag-utang at saka sa risk and return trade-off will be discussed on Chapter 4. Okay. So, susunod na trabaho ni Vice President of Finance and the last is the decision making in dividend policies. So, kung si Vice President for Administration ang gumagawa ng rules, si Vice President for Finance naman ang nagde-decide kung magbibigay ba sila ng dividend policies. So, dahil since siya yung nagti-decision kung saan gagamitin or saan i-allocate ang pera, siya yung nagdi-declare kung magkakaroon ba ng return on investment yung risk ni investor. So sa isang company, pwede siyang hindi mag-declare ng dividend, ng cash dividends. Especially kung si company is mag-extend. And as investor, kagaya ng sinabi sa dating video, mas okay na magstay ang pera mo kapag mag-extend si company. Dahil ibig sabihin nun, yung company ay magtatagal in a long run. So, that's all for the role of Vice President.